are featured in the Lives Restarted documentary on Amazon. Rayna has staffed 2 March of the Living trips. Rayna?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I stand before you all with tremendous pride. Everything in my life has led to this moment. I'm here representing my family in Memphis, Tennessee, my cousins in America, and I'm also representing my family that didn't make it through the Holocaust. My middle name is Rose because my grandmother had a sister named Rosa who during the Holocaust was sold out to the Nazis with her husband and their baby for a kilo of sugar. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. We know Memphis because of Martin Luther King, Elvis Presley, if you like good music, B.B. King. So I've always grown up with a very strong connection to the civil rights movement. My grandparents were much older than me, so I never got the opportunity to have conversations with them as an adult about their experiences. But I know that if they were here today, they would be extremely proud of the work that I'm doing. And it's no coincidence that I'm involved with education and so passionate given the story of my family. And I always wondered for my grandparents what it must have been like to leave World War II, move to Memphis, Tennessee, and see segregation. Because what was one of the first steps in Europe? Jews were told to put on a yellow. So how is that different than putting color on a water fountain or on a bathroom? So growing up, I found myself reading lots of books about the civil rights and being very, very interested in the history of the African American community. And as a teenager, I was involved with a lot of Jewish organizations and super involved in my school. And my whole life, I had an extended network of Holocaust survivors who acted like grandparents. I should have stated this before. My grandparents, when they were alive, they were very insistent that you call them Holocaust refugees and not survivors. Because you see, my grandparents were on the run. My grandmother worked for a Russian bank, and the bank told the employees that Hitler was coming and that they could save them and their immediate families. So my grandmother proposed to my grandfather. They got out. My uncle, when I called him earlier this morning to let him know that I would be speaking, he said, let them know how much we love the Russians, because the Russians are who saved our grandparents, his parents. And after the war, my grandparents went back to Poland, and through a series of events, my grandfather became the head of a DP camp in Nuremberg. So my Uncle Felix was born in Germany in a DP camp, but my father was born in Memphis, Tennessee. And it was really interesting to hear from my uncle about when my grandparents first came to this country, they had nothing. So the opportunities that my uncle had were very limited. Whereas my father got to have a car when he was a teenager. My father got to have new clothes. And my uncle just explained that, there's an old Jewish saying, if you're a tailor who makes clothes by hand, then give your son a sewing machine. This idea that our children should have better lives than our parents. I stand before you today because of all the sacrifices that my grandparents and my parents have made to give me the most incredible, amazing life. And when I was 18, instead of going to college like all my friends were doing, I decided to go to Israel for a year. I went on Young Judea's year course program. And for 3 months, I volunteered in the Israeli army. For the next 3 months, I was working at an archaeological dig site in Jerusalem. Thank God Israel's really old, but that's a good step. After that, I was living in Bat Yam. I was coaching Jewish and Muslim kids in soccer. I had the most incredible year of my life. I found myself as a woman, and it was in Israel that I was exposed to this idea for the first time. You know, when you get to America, you might meet some people on your campus who don't like Israel. You might experience anti-Semitism. That's what they told me. Now, I'm a gal from Memphis, Tennessee, and I knew I was going to college in Boca Raton. What do we think about when we say Boca? Jewish people, more specifically older Jewish people, right? I think there's more Jewish people in the city of Boca Raton than there is in the entire state of Tennessee. So when they said to me, you might experience racism, anti-Semitism, I didn't think I needed that course. But boy, I'm so appreciative that I was exposed to that information in Israel, because I'm not here to tell you my full story, but the first week of school, I was walking in the outdoor breezeway, which is a hallway how people get to their classes, and I see the Hillel table, the Jewish organization on campus, and I see this super, super cute guy talking to the Hillel staff, so you ladies know I walk faster. And I get up to the table, and the really cute guy is saying the craziest stuff I've ever heard about Israel in my entire life. And it was just this moment of like, I know that this happens, but this does not happen at my school, right? So I start talking to this boy who's from Germany, and the first thing he says to my face is that Israeli soldiers drink blood. I'm like,
You know.
I volunteered in the Israeli army. Does this look like somebody who would drink blood? And he went on to tell me how Jews stole the land. And this was when having a BlackBerry was very cool and the internet was like really slow. And I showed him a picture of me working on an archaeological dig site. I said, okay, dude, I know that there's conflict in this region, but I know for a fact that Jewish people have had a connection to this land for over 3,000 years. He went on to tell me how Israel is racist, and I told him about my good friend Yaral, who is an Israeli Muslim Arab who won the TV show Israel's Next Top Model. She was taking me out to some of the best nightclubs in Tel Aviv. So like, I understand that racism is something that exists around the world, but what are you talking about? And unfortunately, that was just the beginning. I went to college with the intention to study international business, graduate, make a lot of money, and go into politics. I was not prepared to be bullied at 19 years old for things that are just a part of my DNA, are a part of my identity, are a part of everything I believe in. Some of the challenges I experienced, I came home one Friday night from Shabbat dinner, and on my dorm was an eviction notice saying that Israel kicks people out of their homes for no reason, that it has no right to exist, and to get out by Monday, that my dorm was scheduled for demolition. How would you feel? They illegally used Palm Beach County's government seal. There was a university stamp on it. I legitimately thought I was being kicked out of my dorm. These bullies were allowed to bring to my university a Holocaust denier, which I don't know if you know this, but Florida Atlantic University has a Holocaust major. At 20 years old, me and some of my friends met with the Dean of Affairs. We showed him a video of a survivor saying their biggest fear in life was somebody saying that the Shoah never happened. And he looked us in the face and he said, if the KKK were to want to come, I'd have to let them. And because of freedom of speech, I have to allow the Holocaust denier to come to school. I never knew until that moment that free speech included hate speech. But I knew as a student I had the right to ask the administration, could you please write a letter on FAU stationery saying you have to give this organization the right to freedom of speech, but the message is not endorsed by the university. The Dean of Affairs promised me, yes, yes. I never got the letter. And that same year, we had a professor who wrote Jesus on a sheet of paper, and in a classroom, he asked students to stomp on Jesus' name. How do you think the students reacted? It made national news. And the man who promised me a letter and never wrote it, you know what he did? He immediately made a video consoling the Christian students' feelings on campus that the professor had the right to the freedom of speech, but the message wasn't endorsed by the university. Tell me that that's not a double standard. I went through so many challenges. I was cyberbullied. My picture was posted with horrible things written about me, all because of my beliefs. And I kept telling people about what was happening, and they said, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. The administration is taking care of it. And their behavior became more intimidating and more aggressive. And when I realized I wasn't going to get the support on my campus, I went to every church, I went to every synagogue that I could, because I thought maybe, just maybe, if people actually knew what was going on in their backyard, then we as communities could come together and come up with a solution. Now again, it's a very long story. I'm not here to tell you the whole thing, but the Cliff Notes version is through mobilizing leaders on campus and in the community. We had a number of people fired at my university. Students were punished. I inspired a movement. My junior year of college, I fundraised almost $30,000. I organized a 3-day Israel convention for over 150 college students from all over Florida. We had representations from the Hidden Child Survivor Group come speak that Saturday night. And it caused such a ripple effect in my campus where it inspired all of these young people to get involved. And I'm proud to say that those people are now working for Federation, for Hillel, for Schusterman. Sometimes when we speak up, we have absolutely no idea what kind of impact we can make. One more story I want to share from my college experiences. The first time I experienced blatant anti-Semitism. I used to go to all the anti-Israel organizations events because to understand each other does not mean that we agree. To understand each other means I listen to what you have to say, I'm respectful, and I ask questions based off of what I heard. I went to all of their events. In fact, there's an article I wrote, "The Mind is Like a Parachute. It works best if it's open," talking about what it was like attending all these events in college. And I'll never forget, I sat next to this boy from Haiti, and we had this amazing conversation about how Haiti was the first to build a field hospital, and how Israel was the first to build a field hospital in Haiti when they had their last natural disaster. How a woman named her baby Israel because of the doctor. How Haiti was the last country to vote Israel into the UN. It was a really beautiful conversation. And then the anti-Israel group showed their film. And at the end of the film, this boy raises his hand and he says, "As a Haitian, I'm disgusted to know that my country was involved with the creation of Israel, and if I was alive, it would have been different." And when it was my turn to speak, I stood up. I said, "In every generation, there's been a major persecution of Jews." And before I could get to the next syllable, the boy from Haiti sitting next to me, he says, "I wonder why." And everyone in the room started laughing at me. I'm the youngest in my family, You better believe it, it's the first time in my life I've ever been told to shut up, and I didn't cry in front of them, but when I left, I was devastated. I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. My parents are paying thousands of dollars for me to go to a university where these students are using university funds to show films, and this is where I experienced anti-Semitism for the first time, not in Tennessee, but Boca Raton. Because everything on my campus, you have to understand, before that point, it was Zionism is evil, it was Israel this, it was Israel that, but in that moment, it was about me and every single person sitting in this room. It was about the Jewish faith as a whole. And that's when I realized we have a much bigger problem than hate on my door. Education is the path to peace. That same boy, my junior year of college, I got very, very involved with organizing events with other student organizations because, in my opinion, if I could show all these different groups how they had a connection to Israel, then they would have another frame of reference. So one of my favorite events I ever planned in college with the Black Student Union, I brought in the Israeli-Ethiopian ambassador who facilitated all the negotiations to get the Ethiopian Jews out of persecution into Israel for safety. And I'll never forget, he came up to me that day, because the anti-Israel group was having an event that night where they were bashing AIPAC. And he came up to me and he said, you know, Rayna, I think your event tonight sounds more interesting. I'll see you there. Why did he think my event sounded more interesting? Because he's a Haitian guy, he's a black guy. I was organizing an event that spoke to his values. So he came to the event, you know, he spoke to the speaker for a really, really long time. The next day we had a big Israel fair on campus, these huge posters with different themes about Israel and facts, and he sat there in the sun for hours and read all these panels and talked to all the students, and then you know what he did? He went home that night and changed his cover photo on Facebook to an Israel flag. Now, was he a little mashuggy to begin with? 1,000%. But why do I share this story? Because don't you dare give up. Because even if you're a voice of one, if you are authentic and you believe in exactly everything that you're supposed to be believing in, people change. You should not change yourself for other people, right? So when I graduated, my passion became my career. For the last 4 years, I was working for a nonprofit with the mission of Israel education, where I got the opportunity to speak to over 100,000 people, mostly public school teenagers, all over the Southeast. And before I share a story or two from my role there, I want something to be known. And that is, a lot of times in the news when we hear, and Karen touched on this, a lot of times in the news when we hear about anti-Semitism happening in high schools, usually it's not because they're hateful. You know, in college, those people were bullies and they knew exactly what they were doing. But as young people with social media, they don't know what is socially appropriate to make jokes about. The majority of them have never met a Holocaust survivor. But what I will tell you is, in my experience of going into the schools, of all the programs that I've done, the largest, the most successful have always been bringing in Holocaust survivors. Your voice, your parents' voice, your grandparents' voice has never been more important than ever. And if you are lucky enough to still have those relationships around, you need to be asking those questions now while you can. 3 weeks ago, I spoke at an inner city high school. I spoke to over 100 freshmen women. None of them knew what the Holocaust was. In my job, I had a student I worked with in Orlando named Sammy Cooperberg, went to Oviedo High School, 15 minutes from the UCF Hillel. She had a water bottle thrown at her head in class, and somebody told her to sit down, Jew. She had a swastika drawn on her arm, and the students were never punished. But Sammy's response was, we need to teach. Because when we see these challenges are catalysts to create change. It is not an excuse to bury our head in the sand. It's not our place to say that somebody else will fight it or somebody else will take care of it, because they won't. When I was in college, I think that was one of the most disappointing things, was to see that the adults were not behind me. Working with young people has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire life. But you have to know that anti-Semitism is at an all-time high. Last August in Los Angeles, I was in a room of almost 100 teenagers. I said, who in this room has experienced anti-Semitism? And over 90% of them raised their hands. I used to work with a teenager who went to Stoneman Douglas, the school in Parkland where they had the mass shooting. You won't hear this on the news, but the very first classroom that the shooter shot in was a Holocaust studies class. We need to wake up. If you think that your grandkids haven't experienced anti-Semitism, then maybe you should ask them. Because they're not just going to share that information with you. And what I was saying earlier about the student in Orlando, she wanted to bring in survivors to speak in her school, and her principal said no. I like to tell people, if you turn no around, it also spells on. She went to the school board. The school board told the principal, we will be having an event. He wouldn't let us take up class time. He said it could only be after school, and that we were lucky we weren't paying janitorial fees. The first one didn't even happen because of a hurricane, but when the event finally happened on a Tuesday night, every challenge inspires our biggest blessing, our biggest opportunity. Because of that, over 700 students and their parents showed up to that event. And the next morning, the survivors and I went to Disney World, but that's another story. And I know that my time now is coming to an end. But 4 months ago, I quit my job to start my own company called The Rose Grows, because I'm very passionate about spreading my message around the country and around the world. And I want to impact as many people to be kind and to have better conversations and to find unity in our diversity. And I want to thank you all for listening to everything that I had to say. And I want to promise you all that I'm never going to stop doing what I'm doing. And every single one of you sitting in the room is exactly why I do what I do.